Hello and welcome to another episode of the Skytale Insights podcast. I'm Annie Robertson Hockey, president of Skytale, and here to talk about one of my favorite topics, strategic planning. So as we head into this coming year, many of our clients are going through the exercise of looking back towards 2025 over the past year and using what happened to think through what their plans are and what their priorities are for 2026. In fact, it is something we are certainly actively doing at Skytale as well. I just finished a budgeting meeting of my own. And, I thought today what we could do is spend a little bit of time talking about what strategic planning should actually look like. It's kind of this buzzy catch-all word, but I think if we break it down, it can become a lot just more digestible, in terms of how can we as leaders build plans that are data-driven, resilient, and honestly executable. Because if a plan is not set up to succeed, it's not going to be a successful plan. In terms of why this should matter, candidly, I think we should always assume our competitors are doing some sort of strategic planning, and in this rapidly evolving world that will leave us behind if we don't do the same. I think there's also still uncertainty in the market. And so, what that means for companies is I think there's really right now a focus on operational efficiency and excellence and higher investor expectations to really make sure that the companies that we're running are not necessarily high growth unicorns that maybe are actively losing money, but really viable businesses that are sustainable and scalable for the long term. Last week, we shared a blog outlining many of the pillars of an effective strategic plan. And so today, what I wanted to do was to go a little bit deeper onto those pillars to think through and just talk about how to bring some of those to life and make them a little bit more actionable. But before we do, candidly, what is strategic planning? So I wanted to mention a few call outs. What strategic planning is not is necessarily budgeting. So budgeting is really important to make sure that of the initiatives you're pursuing, you have a clear budget in place, you know where the financials will be, you know where your margin will be, but that's really a sort of more of a reactive approach. It is also not a wish list, right? It is not sort of, I want to make sure that next year I get to go to speak in the Middle East and that I get to have, a budget to do fabulous dinners with friends, right? Those are all really lovely things that I personally would very much enjoy doing. Feel free to invite me to your fabulous dinners, but that's more aspirational and isn't really tied to strategically what your firm needs to ensure it is continuing to leapfrog and be, again, a sound, sustainable business in a currently evolving market. And then finally, I'll say strategic planning is not sort of a one-day executive offsite, right? I love a whiteboard. I love a working session. I think those are really, really important. But that is one piece of brainstorming and ideation around what a strategic plan might be. Truly, a strategic plan is a living and breathing document. It is also a way to really prioritize what you want to focus on in any coming year and making sure that you are allocating your resources appropriately. There's a finite number of resources that we all have to run our business, and so making sure that usage is aligned with what we want to be doing and growing and focusing on. I also find strategic planning to be a really incredible tool to align your executives, your investors, your teams. And so once that plan is in place, comms, right? Making sure that everyone knows the direction that we're running and we're in lockstep and that we're all bought in so that difficult conversations don't need to happen later on in the year. And finally, I think the beauty of a strategic plan really is the mapping of or the matching of your true vision and the operational plan that's going to get you there. Like I said before, both of those things have to be there. You have to have a plan, but you also need to know really where you are trying to go. And the two of those will go hand in hand. All right, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about what I think are 5 pillars of a really high quality strategic plan. Pillar number 1 is a clear, unambiguous long-term goal. So my team is probably so tired of hearing me say this, but what is your North Star? Where are you trying to go? Where do you want to be at the end of 2026? What does that mean for the end of 2028? What is the 10-year plan, right? What's going to be in 2036? Really, where are we trying to go? And then the second pillar is kind of a diagnostic of where you are today. So if that is my goal state it's so important to understand the state of your business today to really connect the dots and see what you have to get between there and now. So if, I want to be running in this direction, but actually the products that my product team is developing or working on right now are sort of more in this direction, that's something that's really good to look at to make sure that your people, your processes, your systems are all moving in sync. As we always say, you can't, unfortunately, build a business on vibes, and it is really hard to sometimes be objective about a business that you have either started and or actively running and growing and building and putting a lot of time and effort into. And so this is where, we at Skytale spend a lot of time with our clients to really bring an objective view. And that can be looking at baseline performance, KPIs, your marketing position. Let's be honest, sort of where are we today? How far are we from that goal? And what needs to change for us to get there? One of the things we really love to do is benchmarking. I think that can also allow you to have a really objective perspective on, are we investing enough in growth? What is the size of my team, and how does that compare to the vision that I have ahead of me? Just all of those things in terms of your what goes into your P&L, your profit and loss statement, and making sure that everything is tied together. And that leads me to pillar number 3, which is your prioritized initiatives. In this case, one of the things I emphasize most is really making sure that your list of key priorities and initiatives for any given year are, ideally sort of below 5, right? It is so much for an organization that's a living and breathing thing to have in their brain at any given time, say 7 key initiatives that you're working on, having 3 to 5 very clear, very distinct goals for a coming year is a really important way to ensure that you're able to communicate to the team and that the team can keep those things top of mind as they move. Really importantly, I think actually probably almost as importantly as picking those 3 to 5 maybe initiatives is thinking through, what are the things I'm not doing? So, this actually happened recently at Skytale. We were working on a project that is really interesting, I think is actually really important, I hope to eventually do. And then as we started mapping out, what are for our banking business, our consulting business, our investment business, what are the real goals for when we end 2026, what are the things that we want to do? And is this initiative in service of any of those? And the answer candidly was no. So despite the fact that we'd actually put a decent amount of work into that initiative, that is something that we're going to re-examine at the end of 2026 and see if that fits into our vision and our goals for 2027 and reevaluate it that way. That exercise, of course, goes hand in hand with pillar number 4, which is really your financials and your resourcing and your budget. Really thinking about, okay, if these are my key initiatives, what does that mean for the top line that I expect to come in? And what, of course, does that mean for my cost structure? And do those 2 things map out, right? For my key initiatives and priorities for the coming year, will that investment and that return land in both the kind of ratio that I want as well as the timing that I want, right? So, for example, if my goal this coming year is to really beef up my balance sheet, maybe prioritizing an initiative that will have a really high return in 5 years, but will take a lot of upfront investment, probably isn't the initiative for this coming year. Alternatively, if this coming year, we as a firm and our investors have decided that EBITDA is maybe no longer, or not for this period, the highest priority, decreasing your EBITDA to invest in longer term growth could be a wonderful strategy. And, maybe in that case, you're investing more in technology and hiring and systems, et cetera, to serve you. I had sort of an interesting anecdote on this one, just as an example of this in real life. I had a client who, they have a product, it is in market, they have investors, and there's a new leader. And the new leader realized that the investors in this company have a projection in terms of what they want to get from that company in their return threshold, right? So maybe they're expecting a blank return in 4 years. And what that means is both revenue and EBITDA needs to be in a certain position. Now, I think in an incredibly discerning way, the new leader looked at their current product and, even with enormous market share, just given on the average revenue that they're able to bring in from one client, one account, one patient, it just wasn't possible, right? And how important is that to know now? And so then the exercise became, either we need to think about this number in our investors' head and make sure that they are aware of where we are, or what we really need to do is expand our service suite, right? And expand the share of wallet from our clients so that as we grow market share, we're also growing revenue per account and or different types of accounts so we can achieve that goal. So really the exercise then became, what should we build first and when? And again, I say first because, again, that prioritization piece is so key. You cannot build, maybe someone can. It is very hard to build many, many things at once. And so, if they're going to focus on 3 new really core offerings this coming year, what's the order, why, how did they service each other? And that brings me to the 5th pillar, which is really kind of the just operating rhythm, or I would say the implementation of bringing this strategic plan to life. So what is always so painful for me to see is when a strategic plan has been thought through and ideated on, and there's so many great ideas, and then it goes into either a PowerPoint or some plan somewhere, it's in a shared drive somewhere, and it sort of falls by the wayside, and people just go about, in their current days, working on many of the initiatives that they are before. And so to ensure that that doesn't happen, what we really need to do is think about, how do we embed this into the operating machine of the company? So does that become a component of our quarterly business reviews? Okay, how are we making sure that our, company, our team, our individual KPIs, key performance indicators, or success metrics are aligned with those new goals? How do we make sure that compensation is aligned with those new goals, right? If we are investing in, pivoting a product or building out a new service line, maybe we don't necessarily want to compensate the executive team on top line growth that year. Maybe we want to incentivize them on something else, like building and pivoting in a more holistic way. So just to summarize those 5 pillars again, remember, first step is really understanding what is your long-term goal, what is your vision for the business. Step number 2 is, if I really take an honest and thorough look at my business today, where are we and how different do we look today from where we want to be tomorrow? Of course, pillar number 3 then is, what are the initiatives that we need to prioritize? What are 3 to 5 core initiatives that we need to be working on this year? And that relates to pillar number 4, which is, how are we allocating our resources and making sure that our budget maps to those initiatives? And then 5 really is bringing that plan to life. So how do we take something that we've spent so much time on and put on a piece of paper and bring it into the organization so it is embedded in the systems and the structure in the organization, in order to really ensure that it is happening in the DNA of the company, not just as an afterthought. All right, so with that said, what are some of the common mistakes that I see? One of the privileges, I would say, of being a consultant is that we have the fortune of seeing so many reps of companies and so many different types of leaders. And that allows us to really, I think, probably learn a lot of hard knocks and lessons a lot more quickly. Mistake number 1, and I've mentioned this now a few times, is just too many, right? And so if, either at a firm-wide capacity, you have too many goals, or, each team maybe has different goals, but together that means the firm has 20 goals. That makes it really, really hard to know, as a leader, when I get up, what should I spend my day doing? What are we all running at? What are we building together? Related to that would be just creating a plan in isolation. So this is where making sure that any plan we have is rounded out by, of course, I will always say data from our company, data in terms of how we're doing, the advice and wisdom of your team, of course, of your leadership team, but also of others on the ground, looking at the market, what has shifted in this past year, what are my competitors doing? All of these data points are things that should be surfaced and brought into the conversation as we're codifying our strategic plan. And of course, I've said this before, making sure that the plan is rooted in connecting to the financial state of the business and our financial priorities for the coming period. And then, finally, I would say every priority and every strategic initiative you have needs to have an owner, really, really clear accountability. And so, this leader is ultimately responsible for moving, this initiative to here by the end of the year. And to make sure that it is not at the end of the year, right, a qualitative judgment, making sure that we have very, very clear success criteria. That can be financial or monetary. We need to hit this number or this profitability metric, et cetera, by this period. It can also be activity-based. So we need to have launched this. We need to have made a public statement by here. We need to have come out with press releases and have partnerships by here, right? So really depending on what you're building and prioritizing, just making sure everyone knows what success looks like, and not just at the end of the year, but really in regular increments, so you can make sure you're on track as you go, or adjust and catch things sooner rather than later, versus ending up in 2026 at the end of the year and realizing that you actually haven't necessarily been on track for your plan all along. As many of our clients and colleagues and just industry friends and partners are planning for this coming year, I think, we're all sort of talking about what are themes that we're seeing? What are themes that we're seeing right now towards the end of the year, and then also anticipate seeing much more of as we enter this new year? I think there's continued higher interest rates, and that does put an emphasis on cash flow. And so, again, really seeing folks and firms prioritize profitability metrics and flash cash flow metrics as opposed to necessarily top line at the expense of revenue. We're also seeing talent constraints, right? We see this especially in some fields of healthcare. Injectors, for example, hygienists, for example. There's certain roles that are, potentially increasingly needed with growing demand, but graduation rates or the supply of that type of provider isn't necessarily pacing at the same rate. I think really interestingly, and this is something we spend so much time on here at this firm, is the intersection of sort of consumer and healthcare and more, I think, specialized, right, or individualized healthcare. And so I think we're seeing more and more consumers who are demanding more, right? I want healthcare protocol that is tailored to me and my labs and my biomarkers versus based on an average. And importantly, I might want to receive that care and that service in an environment and in a place that feels really nice, is comfortable, is elevated, maybe more of a consumer feeling location than necessarily, a hospital or something a lot more medicalized. There's, I think, no way I can talk about the coming year without in some way mentioning technology and AI that has, of course, made it into the things that we are talking about and focusing on. So what can I do this year to bring in tech that will allow me to untap and unlock efficiencies? And, what are things that I can have tech support me on to be able to deliver services that I maybe even wouldn't have been able to before? In summary, the businesses that we anticipate really thriving in 2026 are ones that plan incredibly proactively, they prioritize incredibly ruthlessly, they operate with true discipline, and use data to guide decisions. And I think, I know it's in December, but the earlier you can get started, the absolute better, to give yourself more time to work with your team, collect all the data you need, and together come up with a vision for the coming period, which is in a really exciting time. And once you do so, comms. Everyone in your company, if you ask them what you're focusing on, should be aligned, and how exciting to be working with a group of folks who are all moving in the same direction. I personally, as a leader, find that incredibly rewarding, and it turns out it can also help enable success as well. So as we wrap up the podcast, the tidbit I will leave you with is I would encourage you to really reflect on what are the three initiatives, or what are the three things that I know will move the needle in 2026? I would encourage you to write those down, sleep on it, think about it more, invite friends, colleagues, trusted folks to opine, to really make sure that they make their way into the strategic plan. And of course, if you would ever want thought partnership as you think about your own strategic plan, that is what the folks at Skytale and the consulting team do, and would certainly love to help. Have a wonderful rest of your year, and happy holidays.